Hello, and welcome to Chicago Chorale's fourth installment of Bruce's Brats, or How the Sausage is Made. I'm Bruce Tammen, conductor of Chicago Chorale. Today, I'm going to talk about the Italian Renaissance composer Giovanni Pierluigi da Palestrina and his best-known choral motet, Sicut Cervus. We've all heard of Palestrina, but we know almost nothing about him. He's a demigod of music, and we assume we have to appreciate him, and that can be off-putting. Sicut Cervus is one of the tenderest, most personal, most ravishingly beautiful masterpieces to come down to us from the Italian Renaissance. And maybe if we understand how Palestrina did that, we'll understand him better too. To begin with, Palestrina's real name was simply Giovanni Pierluigi. The da Palestrina tag at the end is simply the name of the town in which he was born, Palestrina, which is very close to Rome. Naming conventions over the centuries have turned the name of his town into his surname, and that's how we refer to him today. He was born in 1525, and by the time he was 12 years old, he was already singing in the choir at a major basilica in Rome. Basically, he spent his entire life making music at various churches in Rome, a career that culminated in his being appointed director of music at St. Peter's Basilica in 1571. He stayed there until his death in 1594, conducting, playing the organ, and composing. Palestrina was an incredibly prolific composer. He turned out hundreds and hundreds of compositions for all the various liturgies celebrated by the churches in which he served. His career coincided with the Counter-Reformation, specifically with the Council of Trent, which was convened in response to the Protestant Reformation. The council's goal was to strengthen the Roman Catholic Church and eliminate the corruption and abuses which had so fired up Martin Luther and other reformers. The place of music in worship was an important topic of this council. The members wanted to clean up the music and simplify the musical texture, eliminating complex polyphony, melodic flourishes, and colorful harmonic progressions, all of which, they felt, obscured the words of the Mass and the hymns and interfered with the worshippers' religious devotion. A legend grew up around Palestrina's role in all this. It goes like this. Pius IV, the reigning pope, who was also Palestrina's employer at St. Peter's, loved good music and was worried about the extremes to which his crusading colleagues might take things. He asked Palestrina to compose a mass which would be completely free of all the impurities and improprieties that irked the council members, yet still be a beautiful piece of music. As the legend goes, Palestrina responded by composing the Pope Marcellus Mass, which was so perfect that it appeased the council members, thereby saving church music. Later historians have raised doubts about the truth of this story. It's pretty well proved that Palestrina composed the Pope Marcellus Mass some years in advance of this. But whatever actually transpired, we do know that beginning immediately with the end of the Council of Trent in 1564, Palestrina became, in the eyes of these church leaders, the savior of music. And his compositions were held up by the Roman Catholic Church as the model for good church music up until Vatican II. Generations of Catholic musicians studied his works as examples of what they should emulate. About 150 years after Palestrina, in 1725, a music theorist named Johann Joseph Fuchs wrote a book called Gradus ad Parnassum, which means, roughly, the stairway to understanding the true nature of music and poetry. Fuchs based the ideas in his book on Palestrina's music. As understood by Fuchs, Palestrina's music is based on the smooth, dynamic flow of the melody line. It's never just rigid or static. The melody should move, but in an easy, stepwise motion and contain very few intervals of more than a step. When an interval of more than a step does occur, it has to be a small interval, immediately countered by motion in the opposite direction. The harmonic vocabulary as well has to be smooth and consonant, easy on the ear. Dissonances, that is, pitches sounding simultaneously or in close juxtaposition, which are unsettling and unstable, are to be confined to suspensions, passing notes, and weak beats. If a dissonance does fall on a strong beat, like, for instance, in a suspension, it must be immediately resolved. Well, that's music theory language. But it does describe why, when we hear Palestrina's music, even without a background in theory, we find it to be graceful, pleasing, and dignified. It's beautifully structured, and there are no surprises. Some of his pieces are a little monochromatic, even a little boring, even to people who love Palestrina. He wasn't on all the time. But we're always confident that we'll arrive at our destination intact and unruffled. Now back to the piece at hand. Sicut Cervus is actually the first half of a two-part motet. The second half of this motet is every bit as beautiful as the first half, but for some reason, it's the first half which has entered the choral canon as one of the most performed pieces in the entire repertoire. The words, taken from the second verse of Psalm 42, are simple and direct. This psalm is the prescribed text for the blessing of the water in the font during the Easter Vigil, the night before Easter, and recalls the water of baptism. Palestrina's musical setting is composed for 4 voices, singing in imitative polyphony throughout. The voices begin quietly, but at the word desiderat, desires, the note values shorten, the rhythm picks up, and the line rises to its peak at the words fountains of water. The music there seems to spill over like water spilling from a fountain before subsiding in measures 21 and 22. In the meantime, a new text phrase focuses on the singer, the speaker, with the words, "So my soul yearns for you, O God." The musical phrases again become shorter and the polyphony more complex, expressing the thirst and fervency of the singer's spiritual yearning. Now, think back to what I said a few moments ago about Fuchs's understanding of why Palestrina's music is such a perfect model for choral composition. Take a look at the opening phrase of the motet in the tenor part. It moves stepwise until the 4th pitch, drops down a perfect 4th, and then returns immediately back to where it was. It continues this stepwise motion for 6 more notes, drops a 3rd, and returns again to its original position, rounding off the phrase. Some variation of this melodic structure is echoed in each voice through to the end of the first section in bars 23 and 24. The final alto flourish is completely stepwise, ornamenting the cadence but calming down the texture. At the same time, the composer builds tension through subtle harmonic dissonances. In measure 12, the second half of the first beat, the sopranos have a quick, dissonant passing tone B-flat against the A-flat in the altos, followed immediately by the altos moving to a dissonant B-flat, which is resolved by the sopranos moving to a G, so that they're at a third instead of a second, before both parts cadence on a unison A-flat. These are very small things, barely noticeable to our modern ears, which are accustomed to an extraordinary degree of unprepared, unresolved dissonance. But at some level, we do hear it and respond to it. Palestrina sets up an argument, a momentary point of tension, and then he resolves it, and we go on, reassured. It's through such subtle means that Palestrina weaves his delicate but indestructible web, balancing the clarity of his texts with the beauty of his musical procedures. We don't know when Sicut Cervus was composed. Palestrina's scores don't have dates ascribed to them. We do know that it was first published in 1604, 10 years after his death. We also know that his later years were not, personally, as calm and serene as one might suppose, listening to his music. He lost his brother, 2 of his sons, and his wife to the plague. He seems to have considered becoming a priest at this time, but instead he remarried, at this time to a wealthy widow. This gave him the financial independence that he needed in order to compose prolifically until his death, further solidifying his legacy as the savior of music.